They say you can tell a lot about a person by how they treat someone who can't do anything for them. If that's true, then my neighbors had said everything they needed to about themselves long before they ever knew who I really was. I lived in apartment 3B, a modest one-bedroom unit in a building most people passed without noticing. It was old, the kind with chipped paint on the banisters and radiators that hissed like angry cats in the winter, the kind of place where the walls had stories, but no one stuck around long enough to listen. I kept to myself. I didn't throw parties, didn't play music too loud, didn't complain when someone took the laundry out of the machine before it was done. I was always the first to hold the door to say good morning, to smile, and yet I was invisible, or worse, dismissed. People assumed I was a nobody, quiet, average-looking, dressed in plain clothes and worked a job they couldn't be bothered to ask about. To them, I was just that guy down the hall, and because I didn't assert myself, they assumed they could walk over me. It started small. A neighbor left their trash in the hallway overnight. Then someone took a package meant for me and left it opened and empty outside my door. There were the usual passive-aggressive notes taped to the communal fridge, one of them accusing certain tenants of using too much hot water. Then came the noise. Loud footsteps from upstairs that lasted past midnight, thumping music that made my floor vibrate, shouting matches I wasn't part of but could hear as clearly as if I were. I never complained. I figured everyone had their own battles, and maybe grace was a better answer than confrontation, but grace, it turns out, doesn't always get you respect. One afternoon, I offered to help carry groceries for a woman from 2A. She looked at me like I was trying to steal from her. Another time, I held the elevator for a guy I'd seen 100 times before. He stepped in, pressed his floor, and didn't even nod. I said, "Hey, how's it going?" and he just stared at his phone. These weren't isolated moments. They piled up like snow in a blizzard, each flake small but together, heavy enough to freeze a person out. Then there was the building meeting. Held in the lobby once a quarter, it was supposed to be a chance for tenants to voice concerns. I went out of courtesy, sat near the back, listened. When I finally spoke up about a leak in the basement laundry room, the landlord's proxy, a wiry man named Victor, cut me off. "Let's focus on real issues," he said, smirking. A few people chuckled. One guy from 4C muttered, "He finally speaks." I smiled politely and stayed quiet the rest of the meeting. You learn a lot when you watch people without them noticing. Most of them believed they were better than me. I could see it in how they talked to each other, loudly, confidently, and how they looked past me in the hallway, never through me, just past, like I was something to step around. But I saw everything, and I remembered. If you've ever been underestimated for being kind, hit that subscribe button. You're going to love how this story unfolds. I wasn't bitter. I didn't stew over the small slights or dream about revenge. That's not who I am. I believe in letting people reveal themselves. Eventually they do. And when they do, all you have to do is pay attention. Still, I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt sometimes. There's something about being overlooked, about having your kindness mistaken for weakness, that gets under your skin. Especially when you know the truth, because the truth was they didn't know who they were dealing with. Not yet. But they would. Living in that building was like existing in the shadow of a world that didn't care if I was there. I passed neighbors in the hallway who didn't lift their eyes. People cut in front of me at the front entrance, talking loudly into their phones as if I were part of the wallpaper. No one asked my name. No one remembered if I had already introduced myself. They called me "Hey" or "Dude," or sometimes didn't bother with words at all, just a dismissive wave or a silent brush by. There was one morning I held the front door open for the young couple from 4B. She looked up, eyes barely meeting mine, then pulled him through the doorway without a word. Not even a thank you. They'd lived here 6 months and hadn't once acknowledged me. Upstairs was worse. The couple from 5A, Mark and Leah, I only knew their names because their shouting matches echoed through the stairwell, acted like royalty. Leah strutted around with her designer bags, and Mark always parked his obnoxious luxury car just crooked enough to make getting out of the lot harder for everyone else. Then there was Greg. Greg lived in 2C, He fancied himself an artist, but all I ever saw him do was smoke weed and blast music no one had asked for. He had a habit of walking shirtless to the lobby to pick up packages, sunglasses on at night, always narrating his life like someone was filming him. One time he actually looked at me and said, "You still live here? Damn, thought you'd moved out or died." He laughed. I didn't. Victor, the building manager, was another story entirely. He wasn't just indifferent, he was condescending. A middle-aged man with slicked back hair and a fake smile that never reached his eyes. He handled repairs, collected rent, and made sure no one ever forgot who had the master key. When I emailed him about a leaky pipe in the laundry room, he responded 3 weeks later with, "This issue has already been addressed." It hadn't. I fixed it myself with duct tape and a wrench I borrowed from my uncle's old toolbox. Victor only cared about people who could make noise. Leah once complained about a broken tile in her bathroom, and it was replaced within 24 hours. I asked about replacing a faulty smoke detector and got ignored for 2 months. Still I said hello. Still I held doors. Still I kept to myself, hoping maybe, just maybe, someone would notice the effort. One Saturday afternoon, the building hosted a community BBQ in the courtyard. Victor had set up a few folding tables, and someone brought a Bluetooth speaker. I went down, more out of obligation than interest. I made a plate of food, sat near the edge, and smiled politely at anyone who looked my way. Most didn't. Greg cracked jokes loudly with a group from the 3rd floor. I caught my name in one of them, something about me being the building's ghost tenant. They laughed. I didn't correct him. Then Leah stood up to make some sort of toast. "Here's to good neighbors, fun nights, and not having to deal with weirdos living in silence." More laughter. Glasses clinked. Victor clapped along. I stood, tossed my plate, and left. That night I sat in my apartment staring at the ceiling while music from above thudded like a heartbeat. It wasn't just the noise. It was the feeling that no matter what I did, how respectful I was, how present I tried to be, I would never be seen as one of them. I wasn't angry, just tired. Tired of pretending it didn't sting when people treated me like I didn't exist. The worst part was the meeting, another quarterly gathering in the lobby. Victor chaired it with his usual smug air. People brought wine and snacks like it was a social event. When I spoke up again, this time about the package thefts, Victor raised a brow and said, "Okay, let's not start drama." Laughter again. Greg mumbled, "There he goes." Leah rolled her eyes so hard I thought she'd lose them. And that was it. My words vanished into the air, dismissed before they ever had weight. I stopped going after that, but I didn't stop paying attention. You can learn a lot by being the quiet one, by standing still while everyone else rushes around trying to be heard, trying to matter. The louder they were, the more they revealed, and I was listening. Most people assumed I'd ended up in that building out of necessity, just another guy who couldn't afford anything better. And I let them think that. I never offered the truth. No one asked. But there's a whole story behind how I ended up in apartment 3B, and it didn't start with bad luck or low rent. It started with my great-uncle Malcolm. Uncle Malcolm wasn't close with anyone. He lived quietly, spoke rarely, and had no children. He ran a hardware store in Queens for most of his life and owned a few properties scattered across the city. One of them was this building. I visited him occasionally when I was younger, usually at the request of my mother, who said he was lonely, though he never admitted it. He had a gruff kind of kindness, the kind you had to squint to see. He wasn't warm, but he was steady, reliable, and he remembered things. Birthdays, favorite books, how I liked my coffee. He never said much, but I always knew he was listening. When he passed, I was 29. I hadn't seen him in 3 years. He left me a letter written in his sharp, blocky handwriting. It said, "People show you who they are when they think you have nothing. Live where they live. Watch, then decide what to do." Attached was the deed to the building. I stood there in the lawyer's office stunned. No one else had known, not my friends, not my family. Just me and the letter. The lawyer asked if I wanted to sell. I didn't even have to think about it. I said no. I wanted to see what he meant. So I moved in. I didn't use a property manager or let anyone know who I really was. I paid rent to a shell company that funneled everything through an anonymous holding account. Victor, the building manager, believed he reported to a management firm based in Connecticut. In truth, every decision, every repair, every budget request eventually landed on my desk. But I never changed a thing, at least not at first. I kept the building exactly as Malcolm had left it. The same creaky floors, the same uneven paint, the same problems no one really cared to fix. I wasn't interested in flipping it or selling it off to developers. I wasn't interested in profits. I was interested in people. I wanted to know who they were when they thought I was no one. So I became no one. The silence wasn't hard. I'd always been the quiet type, the one who observed more than he spoke, the one who remembered details others missed. I didn't need attention. I needed truth. And slowly it came. I watched the tenants closely. I learned their patterns, who cleaned up after their dog, who left trash in the stairwell, who offered a smile and who slammed the door in your face. I saw who helped the delivery guys and who cursed at them, who lied about packages going missing and who blamed others for the messes they made. It was a strange kind of education. A living study in entitlement and decency. Some surprised me in good ways. Mrs. Ramirez from 1A always brought extra soup to the mailman in winter. Josh from 3C offered his umbrella to strangers. But they were the exceptions. Most were exactly who they pretended not to be. And all the while I lived among them. Invisible, dismissed, ignored. It wasn't easy. There were nights I wanted to scream when music shook my walls, or when Greg's voice echoed through the vents. Mornings when the elevator reeked of weed and spilled beer. Days when Leah complained about the low-class energy in the building while tossing her trash beside the bin, not inside it. But I waited. I waited because I believed that time would reveal everything I needed to know. And I knew something they didn't. I wasn't here to be liked. I was here to see them for who they truly were, and I was learning more every day. I could have pulled rank at any time, could have called a meeting, dropped the documents, stunned them into silence. But what would that prove? That I had money, that I had power? No, that wasn't the point. I wanted to understand before I acted. I wanted to be sure, because when the time came to make decisions, real ones, lasting ones, I didn't want to guess. I wanted to be right. So I stayed quiet, and I watched. Because there's something deeply revealing about how people treat you when they think you're beneath them. And soon they were going to find out just how wrong they'd been. There's a moment when subtle disrespect shifts into something more aggressive, when it stops being quiet exclusion and becomes open mockery. I noticed the change the same way you notice the temperature drop before a storm, slowly at first, then all at once. It began with my front door. One morning I stepped out to find something smeared across it, grease or maybe food, thick and rancid. Someone had written "Clean me, creep" in what looked like barbecue sauce. The smell lingered for days even after I scrubbed it clean. No one confessed, no one apologized. Greg walked by as I was wiping it down. He didn't say a word, just chuckled to himself and lit a cigarette. Leah passed later, pretending not to see anything. Mark made a comment to someone on the phone. Guest 3B finally got a message, and the message was clear. They thought I didn't belong. I didn't react. I didn't lash out. That's what they wanted, some sign of weakness, some emotional outburst to laugh about behind closed doors. Instead, I noted the time, took a photo, logged it. That week, someone rang my buzzer repeatedly at 3 a.m. Every night for 3 days straight. When I stopped answering, they left a note outside my door. Hope the rats like company. I didn't recognize the handwriting, but I had a suspicion. Then came the prank. I returned from the grocery store one evening, arms full of bags, only to find a large yellow envelope taped to my door. It looked official, city seal, bold red letters, notice of eviction. My heart dropped. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with the words, "Pack your stuff, loser. No one wants you here." There was no signature, just a badly drawn cartoon of a sad man crying. The groceries slipped from my hands, apples rolled across the floor, milk burst open in the bag. And for a moment I just stood there staring at the paper. I wasn't hurt because I believed it. I was hurt because it confirmed everything I already knew. They didn't just ignore me. They hated me. And they didn't even know me. That night I sat in my chair, lights off, holding that piece of paper. I turned it over in my hands, studying the edges, the folds, the pressure of the pen marks. These weren't mistakes, these were choices, deliberate, cruel choices. That was when something inside me shifted. I'd spent so long being quiet, so long watching and waiting, that I'd forgotten what my silence was costing me. I wasn't just observing anymore. I was absorbing, and it was wearing me down. But I still didn't raise my voice. Instead, I began to act. I created a log, a real one. Documented every incident, time-stamped everything. I checked security camera angles. I kept every note, every photo, every recording of hallway noise after hours. I backed up files to multiple drives. I became methodical, deliberate, calculated. Because if they were going to push me out, they'd have to do a lot more than leave notes and vandalize doors. And if they thought I was powerless, they hadn't been paying attention. I didn't fix the smear on the door right away the next time it happened. I let it sit. I wanted it to be seen, wanted them to know I wasn't covering for them anymore. When the hallway light on my floor burned out and no one fixed it for 2 weeks, I called the city instead of Victor. A week later, a code enforcement officer walked the halls. Victor panicked and tried to act like he'd reported it himself. He hadn't. I began to notice how quickly people turned when they thought there might be consequences, how quickly they backtracked, minimized, laughed it off. "Just jokes," Greg said when I passed him in the lobby. "We're all just messing around." He smiled like we were old friends. Leah suddenly started greeting me with a tight smile. Mark offered me a beer one night, just appeared at my door like nothing had happened. But I wasn't looking for peace. I was looking for truth, and now I had it. What they didn't know was that the days of their control were numbered. What they thought was just a quiet tenant keeping his head down was really someone who'd already made a decision, not to leave, but to change everything. Once I committed to action, every detail sharpened. I stopped just noticing things. I began collecting them. I became my own surveillance system. Not paranoid, not obsessed, just prepared. I knew that when the time came, words wouldn't be enough. People forget words. They argue with memory, but they can't argue with evidence. I bought a small notebook, one I kept in my pocket. Every noise violation had a timestamp, every package theft, a description, every verbal slight, every maintenance delay, every pattern of disrespect. They all went into the book. I wrote like I was writing a report to someone who needed convincing, even though I already knew what I'd seen was real. I also changed how I moved through the building. I started walking slower, listening longer. I memorized routines. When Greg left for his studio. When Leah walked her dog without a leash and let it relieve itself in the hallway. When Victor skipped his inspections and logged them anyway. They didn't notice the difference. To them, I was still the same forgettable guy from 3B, still nodding quietly, still holding doors. But behind the scenes, I was documenting everything. And I wasn't just recording behavior, I was building a case. I pulled up the building's financials through my holding company's records. I audited repair costs, service calls, even pest control invoices. I saw how Victor padded budgets and billed for things never completed. I saw how often he ignored requests, how poorly he handled conflict. I saw how the people in charge of the comfort and safety of others were the same ones disrespecting it the most. That was when I knew this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everyone who'd ever been dismissed, ever been treated like furniture in a room full of loud voices. It wasn't just petty, it was structural, and it had to end. So I started taking meetings. I met with an attorney who specialized in landlord-tenant law. Not because I needed protection, but because I wanted every step I took to be clean, precise, and legal. I consulted a property management firm, not the kind Victor feared, but a serious, ethical one, the kind that knew how to transition a building with integrity. I even met with a local contractor, quiet guy, detail-oriented, who walked the building with me under the pretense of being a friend visiting from out of town. He took photos discreetly, pointed out the aging pipes, the damaged vents, the slanted balcony on the 3rd floor. All things Victor had ignored, all things tenants had complained about, all now part of my growing file. Bit by bit, the pieces were lining up. And the building was still spinning the same way it always had. Greg still shouted into his phone at midnight. Leah still threw wrappers near the front door like she owned the sidewalk. Victor still ignored emails, then blamed the tenants for communication breakdowns. But I wasn't frustrated anymore. I was focused. I even changed how I dressed. Not drastically, just enough. Clean boots instead of old sneakers. A pressed shirt instead of a hoodie. People noticed, but they didn't ask questions. They were too used to not caring. Josh from 3C, one of the few kind souls in the building, commented once, "Looking sharp, man. New job or something?" I smiled and shrugged. Something like that. He nodded and didn't push. That's what I liked about him. He didn't make assumptions, he listened. The transformation wasn't sudden, it was measured, purposeful, because I didn't want shock, I wanted change. And change doesn't come from shouting louder. It comes from having everything ready when silence ends. I walked the halls differently now. I didn't flinch when someone laughed behind my back. I didn't lower my gaze when Victor passed. I didn't rush through the lobby. I took my time, made eye contact, offered quiet greetings, and kept moving. Calm. Certain. Because I knew something no one else did. This chapter, the one where I was underestimated, was coming to an end. And the next one? Well, let's just say they wouldn't see it coming. It started with envelopes. Identical white ones, sealed and formal, delivered to every unit with quiet precision early on a Monday morning. Each bore a simple return address, the management company I now officially represented. The company that until now had remained invisible to the tenants, and each contained something that for the first time in years made the entire building go still. Some received standard notices, others got lease non-renewal letters. A few were warned about violations that had gone unaddressed for too long, all of it legal, all of it documented, all of it exact. I watched from the lobby as the news spread like a gas leak, silent then explosive. People opened their envelopes at different times. Some were calm, others confused. Greg stormed out of his unit holding his paper like it was on fire. "What the hell is this?" he shouted into the hallway, waiting for someone to answer. Leah appeared 10 minutes later, brows furrowed, scanning the fine print with a trembling hand. Mark read his silently, face unreadable, lips pressed tight. No one knew what was happening. No one knew who had made it happen. Speculation began instantly. Did someone buy the building? Is this one of those tech companies trying to flip the place? I heard it's a foreign investor. Victor was cornered first. Greg demanded answers. Leah shouted. Victor raised his hands like a man being robbed. "I don't know anything yet. I'm trying to find out myself." He looked panicked, unprepared. His usual smugness vanished as he realized that control was no longer in his hands. He called the management number listed on the notice. The call routed through a legal department. He was told he'd receive an update soon from someone in charge. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. Meanwhile, the building changed. The atmosphere shifted overnight. The volume lowered. People whispered instead of laughed. Doors closed gently instead of slamming. For the first time in forever, no one left trash in the hallway. Someone even cleaned up the graffiti in the stairwell without being asked. And me? They suddenly remembered I existed. I was greeted in the hallways now. "Hey man, how's it going? You got one of those notices too, right?" I smiled and nodded. Sure did. But my notice was different. Mine was a single page marked internal file copy, confirming that all actions had been approved and executed by authority of ownership. No one knew, not yet, but they were starting to sense something was wrong, or maybe something was right, and they just never expected it. Greg, for once, didn't blast his music that night. Leah took her dog out early and picked up after it. Mark held the door for a delivery guy. Even Victor started checking the building's infrastructure like a man suddenly aware of everything he'd neglected. People were afraid, and fear makes people polite. But I wasn't interested in fear. I wasn't trying to scare them into decency. I wanted something deeper, something earned. But that part would come later. For now I let them wonder, because the truth was still hidden. They still thought some stranger had come in and disrupted their kingdom. They imagined suits in skyscrapers, investors with spreadsheets, executives who didn't know their names. They didn't imagine me. The guy they ignored in the elevator, the one they pranked, laughed at, excluded. The one who quietly observed while they showed their teeth. They had no idea the person who signed those notices lived among them. Still did. Still watched. Still remembered. The silence became its own kind of tension. Neighbors began knocking on each other's doors asking questions. Rumors flew. Someone said a new landlord was planning luxury renovations. Someone else said the building was going condo. Leah started organizing a petition, trying to unite the tenants, but it was too late for unity born of panic. The choices they made when they thought no one important was watching still mattered. Victor kept calling the number on the notice, but no one would talk to him directly. Everything was handled through a digital portal, layered and professional, designed to make him feel small. And for once, he was. He sent emails. I read them. He left voicemails. I archived them. He begged for a meeting. He was going to get one. Just not yet, because timing matters. And the timing for truth? It was almost perfect. When the meeting was announced, no one knew what to expect. The notice was short. Mandatory tenant meeting, lobby Thursday at 6 p.m, attendance required. It came from the management company, the one no one had ever seen, the one Victor still couldn't explain. People whispered about it all week. Some said the building was about to be sold. Others thought rent was being raised or the whole place was going luxury. Greg joked that we were probably all getting kicked out unless we started wearing suits. Leah claimed she had a contact at City Hall who said the building had new owners. None of them had the slightest clue. Thursday arrived, and the lobby filled slowly. Folding chairs were set up in rows, just like the old meetings, but the air was different now, tight, alert. People sat stiffly, arms crossed. The usual gossip was replaced by nervous silence. Even Victor seemed smaller, tucked into the corner like a schoolboy awaiting punishment. I walked in last. Not because I wanted attention, but because I'd earned the moment. I wasn't dressed to impress, just clean, deliberate. No hoodie, no worn jeans, a crisp button-up, shoes polished. I nodded politely as I passed familiar faces. Some nodded back. Others just stared. I stepped to the front where Victor used to stand. He blinked, confused. I cleared my throat. "Good evening," I said. My voice was calm, steady. "I'm the owner of this building." Silence, no gasps, no outbursts, just a collective pause, the kind that holds breath and doesn't let go. "I know many of you don't recognize me in this role," I continued. "But I've lived in 3B for 3 years, and for those 3 years I've watched, I've listened, I've taken notes." Someone laughed, a short, bitter sound. Greg. "You're joking," I turned toward him. "No, I'm not." He stood, trying to puff himself up. "You're telling me you've been the owner this whole time, that you let us treat you like I didn't matter," I offered. He faltered. "Yes," I said simply. "I did." Leah muttered something under her breath. Mark just looked at the floor. Victor stood slowly. "Why the secrecy? Why not introduce yourself like a normal landlord?" "Because I didn't want to be a landlord," I replied. "I wanted to know what kind of people lived here, what kind of community I had inherited." "And people reveal their truth when they think you can't do anything for them." I scanned the room. "And you did." Nobody spoke. I let the silence sit a moment longer before continuing. "Everything you've received over the past few weeks, every notice, every warning, it was based on behavior. Not rumors, not revenge, facts, documented, verified, and legal." Greg opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone," I said, "but I am here to change the standard. This building will no longer be managed by people who ignore maintenance, neglect safety, or enable disrespect. Some of you have nothing to worry about. Others, you'll need to make adjustments." Victor finally stepped forward. "I didn't know. I had no idea." "I know," I cut in. That was the point. He looked like he wanted to argue. Then he sat back down. I turned to the crowd. "I've spoken with a new management company. Repairs are already being scheduled. Common areas will be cleaned regularly. Complaints will be handled professionally. But standards will rise, so will accountability." Still no one moved. No one cheered. No one objected. They were processing. And that was enough. I ended the meeting with a simple message. From here on out, how you live here will matter. How you treat each other will matter. Not because I'm watching, but because this building deserves better. And so do the people who act with basic human decency. I walked back to my seat and sat quietly. No applause, no confrontation. Just the quiet realization that everything had changed. And I didn't have to raise my voice to make it happen. The days after the meeting were quieter than I'd ever heard the building. No late-night shouting, no hallway arguments, no passive-aggressive notes taped to doors, just silence, tense, uneasy, unfamiliar. Everyone walked more softly, spoke more carefully, like they were afraid their next word might cost them something. And in some cases it would. The consequences weren't about revenge. They were about standards, about drawing a clear line between acceptable and unacceptable behavior and sticking to it. The first to go was Victor. I gave him the courtesy of a private meeting. We sat in the office that had once belonged to him, though legally it never had. I laid out the facts: missed inspections, falsified reports, inappropriate conduct, budget misuse. He didn't argue. He knew. I was just doing what everyone does, he said, defeated, cutting corners. And that's exactly why you're being replaced, I replied. He packed up his things the next day. No one said goodbye. Next came the non-renewals. Greg received his first. A formal notice, respectful in tone but firm. 30 days to vacate. No explanation needed. He tried to argue, tried to plead, said he could change, promised he'd be quieter, cleaner, better. But he'd had years. He wasn't surprised, not really, just embarrassed. For the first time, he looked me in the eye when we crossed paths in the lobby. He didn't say anything. Leah and Mark got theirs soon after. Their unit had been a source of repeated complaints from other tenants, not just me. The notes, the noise, the confrontations, all of it documented, all of it consistent. They didn't take it well. Leah accused me of discrimination, said I was on a power trip. Mark just muttered insults as he packed. But deep down, I think even they knew it was justified. They'd spent years believing they were above consequence. This was the first time reality said otherwise, but not everyone faced the same fate. Mrs. Ramirez from 1A got a lease extension with a rent freeze. Josh from 3C received a thank you note and a voucher for a local market. The Johnsons from 2B, who'd always treated everyone with kindness, were offered early access to upcoming renovations at no extra cost. I wasn't just removing toxicity, I was rewarding decency. Because the truth is, kindness deserves reinforcement too. Not just punishment for cruelty. As renovations began, the building changed physically, not just emotionally. Hallways were repainted. Lighting was fixed. The broken buzzer was replaced with a digital system. Packages stopped disappearing. Maintenance requests were handled within days instead of months. And slowly, the energy shifted. People started talking again, but differently this time. They greeted each other with sincerity, helped hold doors, checked in on neighbors. There was still caution in their eyes when they looked at me, but it was no longer the fear of punishment. It was something closer to respect. Some asked questions. Why didn't you say anything earlier? Why live here if you owned it? What made you finally step in? I answered honestly when I felt it mattered. I told them I believed in watching first, acting second. That I wanted to see who people were when they thought no one was paying attention. Some nodded in understanding, others just walked away. And that was fine. Not everyone needed to get it, but I knew who did. I knew who had earned their place and who had wasted it. What surprised me most was how it changed me. For so long I'd kept my head down, convinced that silence was strength. And maybe it was, for a while. But silence isn't always justice. Sometimes justice requires action, boundaries, voice. I had found mine, not by shouting, not by demanding, but by observing, planning, and standing firm when it mattered. The building I now walked through each day wasn't perfect, but it was better, and it wasn't because I was powerful, it was because I used that power with purpose. A purpose they'd helped me define. 3 months after the meeting, the building no longer felt like the place I'd moved into. It smelled different, cleaner, Fresh paint and newly scrubbed floors had replaced the lingering scent of mildew and cigarette smoke. The stairwells echoed less with tension and more with soft conversations and the occasional laughter. I used to count how many people ignored me in a day. Now I counted how many smiled. It wasn't perfect, not by any stretch. Old buildings carry their history like bones under skin. But something had shifted, not just in the walls or the wiring, but in the people. New tenants began arriving. You could tell they were different. Not because they dressed a certain way or spoke more politely, but because they were aware of community, of presence, of others. They weren't here to dominate the space. They were here to live in it, to share it. I made sure of that. The application process now included more than background checks. I met each prospective tenant personally. Casual conversations, nothing formal. Just enough to get a feel for who they were when no one else was watching. That small window told me everything I needed to know. Meanwhile, the ones who stayed learned to adjust. Leah and Mark were gone, but their absence was a kind of gift to the rest. No more angry shouting through thin walls, no more discarded trash bags beside the entrance. In their place came a young couple who planted herbs on their windowsill and hosted a welcome dinner for the floor. Greg left in silence. No goodbye, no confrontation. Just an empty unit and the echo of music that no longer played. His replacement was a single father with a quiet daughter who drew chalk art on the sidewalk. She waved at me every morning. I always waved back. And the others, Mrs. Ramirez, Josh, the Johnsons, they flourished. Mrs. Ramirez started a small garden in the courtyard. Tomatoes, herbs, even flowers. She taught the neighborhood kids how to plant seeds. Josh organized a book swap. The Johnsons hosted a holiday potluck in the laundry room. Community. Real, tangible, human community. And through it all, I stayed where I was. Apartment 3B. Same view, same creaky door, same kettle whistling in the morning. I didn't move upstairs or renovate for myself. I didn't upgrade to something fancier. I wanted to stay grounded, to remind myself why I'd done this in the first place, because power without humility is just ego. And I'd had enough of that from the people who used to fill this space. I wasn't interested in being some untouchable figure above the rest. I was still a neighbor, still part of the building, still someone who swept the hallway when it needed it and brought in stray packages when rain threatened. But now, I was also someone they looked at with something new. Not fear, not pity, not confusion, but respect. Real respect. Earned, not demanded. And maybe that was the part that meant the most to me. One afternoon, Josh stopped me by the mailboxes. He looked nervous, hands in his jacket pockets. "Can I ask you something?" I nodded. Did it feel good? You know, proving them wrong? I thought about it. It felt necessary, I said, but the real satisfaction didn't come from proving anything. It came from watching things get better. From seeing the people who deserve to thrive finally get a chance. He smiled, nodded slowly. That makes sense. Then he added, "I'm glad you stayed. So was I." There's something deeply healing about restoring peace in a place that once felt poisoned. About building, not just punishing. About guiding quietly instead of ruling loudly. And maybe the greatest shift of all was internal. I no longer felt invisible, not because others finally saw me, but because I had stopped hiding from myself. I'd stepped into a role I never thought I'd want, and found that it fit, not because of the title, but because of the responsibility it carried. I had a voice now, not just a voice people heard, but one I believed in, and I intended to use it, not just here, but beyond. But that's a story for another day. It's fascinating how quickly everything changes once people realize they've underestimated you. Looking back, I can see clearly now that my silence and kindness had always been interpreted as weaknesses. I was always the one quietly holding doors, softly greeting neighbors, never complaining. That made me easy to ignore, easy to overlook. But the moment they realized I owned the building, their perceptions flipped upside down. They never expected me, of all people, to hold that power. I had spent years as the quiet observer, watching how people behave when they believe no one important is looking. And through all that silence, what I'd seen was simple. People treat you exactly how they feel they can get away with. When they finally learned the truth, the quiet guy from apartment 3B was suddenly someone they desperately wanted to understand. What they never expected was how I handled the situation. There was no dramatic revenge, no loud confrontations, just firm decisions, clear boundaries, and fairness applied without prejudice. Because power isn't about revenge, it's about responsibility. It's about knowing when to act, how to act, and doing so with precision and integrity. For the first time, my neighbors really saw me, not as a background figure, but as someone who could shape their lives significantly. And surprisingly, instead of resentment, I found respect. Respect earned not through fear, but through actions that demonstrated who I truly was. Actions that showed them I was watching all along, not to judge harshly, but to protect the place we all called home. The changes I made weren't merely structural, they reshaped the very culture of our building, a culture where kindness became the expectation rather than the exception, where consideration was common courtesy, not a rare surprise. New tenants came, drawn by the sense of community that now defined this place. They entered quietly, but soon enough their voices added positively to the life we shared. Still, some were puzzled by my choice to remain in apartment 3B. They assumed someone with my authority and resources would want to elevate their lifestyle, to live in luxury or at least move to a nicer unit. But that wasn't why I had chosen to stay. I remained exactly where I started because I needed the reminder that my strength didn't come from the apartment number on my door or the name on the building's deed. My strength came from understanding who I was when no one was watching. Yet even with all these positive transformations, I realized there was still more work to do. The lessons learned here went beyond just this building. They spoke to larger truths about human dignity, respect, and what it truly means to build community. So, I expanded my efforts. I founded a non-profit to support tenants across the city, helping those who'd felt voiceless, powerless, and ignored just like I had been. My experiences allowed me to create real, tangible change, and I found deep purpose in this new chapter of my life. Every story I heard from the people I helped reminded me why my quiet approach had worked. It was never about forcing respect, but creating an environment where it naturally flourished. Every single person deserved to feel heard, respected, and valued. My goal was to ensure that others, like me, could find their voice in quiet ways and still be heard loudly. My neighbors had never expected this from me. They never saw beyond the quiet smile, the gentle nod, or the polite greeting. They never imagined that behind my silence was determination, behind my kindness was strength, and behind my patience was unwavering clarity. Perhaps most importantly, they never understood that true power isn't about being seen. It's about seeing clearly. It's about paying attention when others don't, listening carefully, and choosing to act at exactly the right time. So if you've ever been underestimated because you are quiet or kind, because you don't shout or demand attention, remember this. Your strength doesn't need to scream to be real. It doesn't need applause to be valid. And when it's time for others to see it, they'll realize how wrong they've been. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to the channel. Hit the subscribe button now and join our growing community of people who believe in quiet strength and meaningful change. Before you go, don't forget to click the video suggested here on your screen. It's another powerful story of someone underestimated who found their voice and changed everything. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Thank you for watching. Your presence means the world to me. I'll see you in the next story.